Hi, good morning. Nice to be here. It's an honor for us to be here with you, and a big thanks to the organizers for having us here. Today we will be speaking on a very important subject which has to do with the energy transition and net zero Greece, how Greece will go to the minus 55% and minus 100% by 2050. Now, my name is Tsopelas. I'm the chairman and CEO of McKinsey in Greece and Cyprus. And together with me is Loukas, Ziomas, who is a partner in Greece and in Qatar, and responsible for the work we do in both countries in terms of sustainability. What is net zero Greece and what is net zero Europe? When EU decided to set the targets of 55% and net zero, there was no bottom-up plan as to how this would be achieved. What McKinsey did wanted to cover that gap. So it developed a proprietary methodology which basically took 600 different decarbonization levers and applied these levers to 75 different sectors. And as a result, what happened was that we were able to identify the cost-optimal way through each sector would achieve the targets set by the countries and by Europe. The first thing was applying this to Europe, and then as soon as that happened, we brought it in Greece, we discussed, and we basically agreed to do this, since that will be a big, important contributor to the climate law that is going to pass very soon. When we are thinking about this, one would say lots of words in terms of how important it is for the climate change and so on and so forth. We did an analysis which was quite interesting that basically demonstrated that if you take the temperature anomalies and you compare the years between 60 and 80 and the years between 2000 and 2015, you would have 75 times higher risk in getting temperature anomalies in that context. And then, if you want to make that more practical and bring it to the med, you see three things. The first one is that you're going to have more than 6 months of drought in Mediterranean in 2050. The second thing is you're going to get double the number of fires, both as occasions as well as magnitude. And third, you are going to get a doubling of the days in a year where you'll be having in the Mediterranean basin temperatures of more than 37%. So everyone realizes the impact that would have on agriculture, on tourism, and other sectors of the economy. And as far as cost is concerned, I'll give you only one factoid, which is that the cost of claims because of the fires and all these phenomena is going to be going up by 50% across Europe. What is the starting point for Greece? We are emitting 85 million tons of CO2 per year. 32% of that, as you see, it's coming from the power sector. 32%, you see here, the size of each one of these buckets represents, obviously, in relative terms, what it is. So you see first the power, which is basically 32% of the total consumption, of the total production of CO2. Then you have industry, which emits 25%, and of that part, the three bigger ones, the first one are the refrigerant gases, the second one is the cement, and the third one is the refining. Then you have 20% represents by transportation, and the two big packs there, the one is passenger cars, and the other one is the medium and heavy-duty trucks and buses. Then you have agriculture with 10%, and then residential as well as waste, each one at 6%. And also you have a negative 3.5 million emissions, which is coming from our soil, from our forest, is what we are calling nature-based CO2 consumption. With this in mind as a context, we would like to take home from here 7 key messages. 7 key messages. Message number 1, we can achieve the targets of 55% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. We can. And each sector will decarbonize at a different pace and to a different level. which means that some sectors will get to zero, some others will not. But then we will have the negative emissions coming from nature-based solutions. Second message, there are 6 specific technologies which are going to be making 80% of the decarbonization of the country. And these 6 technologies are, first of all, electrification and renewables. The second one is battery electric and storage. The third one is sustainable hydrogen. The fourth one is energy efficiency. The fifth one is nature-based solutions. And the sixth one is about carbon capture and storage. 6 technologies making up 80% of the decarbonization. The third point is that the power sector is the fundamental power of the transition because it is between the renewable sources of energy and the energy consumption. And as such, it will double in size as far as gigawatt hours, as far as generation, and it will more than double in terms of installed capacity. And the generation mix will change dramatically. At 2050, more than 90% of the generation will come from renewable sources of energy. Number 4, how much money will that cost? It will cost 500 billion for us to be able to do that. However, 425 of this is basically redeployment of capex, means that that money would have been spent anyway, but they are just going to be spent in a different technology. For example, we would buy a car, but now we would buy an electric car. 75%, 75 billion is the new capex that we are describing. And the model of the economy is going to go from an OPEX to CAPEX model. You will ask, out of this money that we will be spending, how much will it be recuperated by OPEX savings? And the answer is 60% of the CAPEX is recuperated within the period, and the remaining is recuperated within the next 20 years. Fifth point, what the impact on Greece is. Greece is going to take an impact on GDP by 5 billion. Positive value creation and job creation will be happening. And also household costs, both in terms of heating as well as transportation, will go down. And Greece has an opportunity to further improve its trade balance and value creation and GDP impact if it takes a position in the supply chain of a number of technologies that we will be looking. In order to do this, we need very, very aggressive changes in the regulatory framework, in the processes, and so on and so forth. And last but not least, in the question what will be happening is that energy transition is going to be accelerated by the crisis, and it is going to lead to lower prices, it is going to lead to more stability and better security of supply. Loukas is continuing with the presentation.
Thank you, George. Pleasure to be here. George referred to a very bold statement before, the statement that practically both the Fit for 55 as well as net zero by 2050 is achievable, and that's what the analysis shows. The analysis also indicates that each of the sectors that currently emit CO2 will move at a different pace, and that's what you can see here on this page. The sector that will lead the way is power, is actually going to come first, and it's going to come first because of the very high competitiveness of renewable energy. The previous speaker talked about how renewables are disrupting the energy systems. They're going to come fast, they're going to come early, they're going to lead the way. The rest of the sectors are going to move in a slower pace, and they're going to be waiting for more mature technologies that will come in the second period, the 2030 to 2050 period. Now, with that in mind, I think it's important to refer to those technologies, the technologies that will allow us, the technologies that will allow us to get to 55% by 2030 and almost zero, or net zero more accurately, to 2050. And there are 6 technologies here. Each one has its own impact in the spectrum of impact that we're going to see up until 2030 and 2050, with electrification and renewables coming first. Approximately 40% of the decarbonization to 2050 will come from electrification and renewables, the lion's share. And then this gets followed by battery electric technologies, not only in passenger cars, but in general in transportation, followed by hydrogen. There is a lot of hype around hydrogen. It will be an amazing and very important lever to get there. However, it still faces technological challenges, but it will be essential in order to get to 55 and also 0 to 2050. Nature-based solutions, energy efficiency, and carbon capture and storage. I think the important point here is we need all of them. It's not just about one technology. It's a combination of technologies that will get us to net zero 2050. Now, each of those technologies has a different type of impact per sector. We see that electrification and renewables dominate the power sector. The industrial sector will need the whole spectrum. Technologies get distributed across. The transportation sector relies primarily on battery technology. And then we have buildings, which is another big important area we need to work on, which primarily relies on electrification. Practically what? Heat pumps. Moving from traditional fossil fuels to heat up and warm up our homes to electricity and electrons. With that in mind, I think it's very important to recognize the importance of the power sector. George referred before to the fact that the power sector will be in the midst of this transition. If we stop and take a look at where we are today, in today's energy system in Greece, this chart shows the uses and the sources of energy. You can see very, very clearly that the energy system is dominated by fossil fuels: coal, oil, and gas. Now, fast forward to 2050. How can we get to a new energy system that will allow us to get to net zero? This is the new energy system. It's an energy system that has a very small share of fossil fuels, there only to help us balance when we need them during peculiar hours during the day, and a dominant position of renewables, with the power sector in the middle, acting practically as a transformer to move these electrons to final uses. You also see a green part here, which is hydrogen. We talked about hydrogen. Hydrogen is an important part of the transition. Why? Because it helps us store these electrons into a medium that can be used throughout the day when we don't have capacity from renewable sources. So practically a new energy system dominated by renewable sources. Now, if we double-click on the power sector, and this is very important, there is a lot of talk around what's going to happen in the power sector in Greece, especially in the context of the current disruption. If we look at the power sector, and we double-click in it, and we look at it today in 2050, both from a capacity and a generation point of view, there are a few important messages. First and foremost, you see how much it grows. More than 150% growth in terms of capacity. We are talking about a full electrification of the economy. The second thing is, this last bar in 2050 is dominated by renewables. Onshore wind, offshore wind, solar. The third point is, it's not just onshore wind and solar that plays a role, especially for Greece. There is a very big share there around offshore wind. And this plays a very important role for Greece. We have a lot of offshore wind capacity. We need to take advantage of it. And finally, gas and battery storage mediums will also play an important role to balance the system. And with that, let's switch to capital commitment to get there.
Let's get back to the amount of capex required to do so. We discussed about investments. We said that it needs 500 billion, out of which 425, which is recurring, and 75, which is new. Of that 500, 100 will be in the first 10 years, and then the remaining 400 in the next 20 years. What you see here is a very interesting picture, which is where the money will go. So 55% of that will go to transportation. And if you see on the right, where it is highlighted with gray, we're talking about 270 billion that will go to road transport. Imagine that, and you'll understand it later when I'm going to be discussing about opportunities for value creation for Greece, that this is primarily imports. And then the other part has to do with wind offshore, and heat pump electrification and insulation. Now, we discussed about the impact very quickly, 5 billion of GDP, positive trade balance impact in terms of fuel, negative trade balance impact from the electric vehicles and res material imports, and some potential export potential from onshore of offshore wind as well as some of the materials. Important is the household impact. We will get 15% in heating and 15% in transportation cost reduction by 2030, and respectively, in heating, you are going to get 25% by 2050 and 35% by 2050 for transportation. These are going to be the savings for the households. Now, I talked about 5 opportunities to get a role in the value chain, and these 5 opportunities, as I said before, is energy efficiency in buildings. It is the offshore wind hub. Greece has the potential of developing a hub that will really export to other countries. Circular battery hub, sustainable hydrogen, and as well as the refurbishment of ships that go with the energy transition and the new fuels. These 5 opportunities, Greece needs to develop investment envelopes and support investments and funding of these opportunities. With that, it will increase employment to 200,000, it will increase GDP impact to 15 billion, and it will massively improve trade balance. It's obvious that in order for that to happen, you need very brave interventions. You need new regulatory frameworks, for example, for offshore wind. You need changes in the procedures, adiodotici, etc. You need important management and coordination of this program, which needs to be created by a unit within the public administration. And then in terms of funding, you need to have funding because there is a mismatch between CAPEX and OPEX savings. And as I said before, 60% of CAPEX will be recuperated within the period. This means that for businesses as well as for households, we need to have a funding mechanism to do so. And finally, you need the society engagement, you need the programs for awareness, you need the consumer shifts through tax incentives, and so on and so forth. Last page. The 4 key questions that are burning all of us. Question number 1, is energy transition responsible for the energy crisis? The answer is that the primary reason for the energy crisis is demand and supply imbalances in the hydrocarbon area. The role of energy transition in this was that when hydrocarbon long-term investments are evaluated, because of energy transition, the people that are doing the assessment are seeing probably a smaller period for investments that typically need much longer. So there you have an impact of energy transition into this by increasing the doubt or the uncertainty about the economics of these long-term investments. Other than this, it was just the imbalance of supply and demand. The second question is, will this crisis delay or accelerate energy transition? And the answer is very simple. It will massively accelerate it. We need to deploy more renewables faster to protect the society and the businesses and the economy. What will be happening in the next 2 to 3 years is a recuperation of the fossil fuel production for obvious reasons, but that is not changing the fact that it will indeed accelerate. Third question, what will happen in the next 2, 3, 4 years in terms of energy prices and volatility as a result of the crisis? The answer is that it is going to go up. Energy prices are going to go up on average, not from the level that they are today, but from the average level of the recent periods. The average prices will be up and volatility will be up. And last but most important question is, what exactly will happen with net zero? Net zero will have 3 incredibly important pieces of impact. First, it will create a more stable system with much less volatility. Secondly, a much lower cost and efficient system. Energy prices are going to go down materially. And last but not least, it will relieve Europe from the agony of supply of energy sources once and for all. Thank you guys very much.